Um, so I sent out yesterday, one day notice, a document that I had sort of indicated there was a small team that was like, wages. It's on everyone's mind. It's being part of like every work group is talking about wages and how do we approach wages. And this is a sort of a summary that this small group put together about like, okay, what's been done in Kansas to support wages from all angles. And so you'll see a lot of the initiatives that Child Care Aware of Kansas has been the lead on, a lot of supports that have come out of the relief funding efforts. And then there's a little section on some other states that have done a few items that we're trying to scan and see what else is out there. I know this group did a little bit of that research whenever we wrote our recommendation about the bonus payment. And it's difficult to kind of untangle one-time payments, retention bonuses from the broader wage conversation. So there is a little bit of overlap, but you'll see, I think Minnesota is noted in there, North Carolina, which we know does the wages, the teach and wages program, and some of their efforts. And then there's a little bit of some thoughts on some next steps and how we might approach this. So I will kind of let that document, let you guys pull that up. Yes, sorry, Kelly. And I need to put it on like a Google Drive so I can actually share it outside of an attachment too. So give me just one second, Kelly, and I'll forward that on.
And Debbie sent it out in an email yesterday. So if you got an email from Debbie, mine arrived at 10 a.m. yesterday.
I'm gonna send this.
And I see you're in there, Kelly. So you might see if you got one from Debbie Deer at 9:57. Oh, is that right? I'm sorry, it wasn't 9:57. It was, I lied. It was from Sarah. I'm going to stop talking now.
You're good, Amy.
I clicked on the
email
wrong thing.
Overload. It happens. We all get them.
I'm sorry. My apologies.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Kelly, I just sent it to you. Does anyone else need it forwarded on? Okay. So that's just a document. We can use that as a starting place to have a conversation. We can look at the notes from last time. The other thing I wanted to say is that I think, Kelly, you had made reference to this in our last conversation, Kelly Mark, sorry, I know we have two Kellys, about the cost modeling. And we talked about Simon Workman, who is sort of nationally recognized as the prenatal to 5 fiscal expert in a lot of ways. His work is cited and used in a lot of cost calculators. We are partnering with him on trying to determine actual quality, cost of quality care. And so he's going to come to the panel meeting on May 20th. So if you're able to make the May 20th panel meeting, he is going to talk about the models and how to think about them and how they can be useful and where they fall short and what information is really needed. It's one thing to have a model. It's another thing to have all of the data that you need to populate that model. So we haven't really figured out if we should invite him to the full panel meeting or if, given that this working group is really the one who has focused on the wages, if we just invite him to this working group and then it can be a smaller discussion. It's easier, I think, to have a presenter do back and forth in a smaller group, but I want to, I'm open. We haven't set that. We've just held his time that morning. So I don't know if folks have thoughts on how they might want to use his time, questions you have in advance. He is a very personal guy, so he is very willing, I think, to adjust whatever it is that you guys might have specific questions about. And we can certainly, between now and then, give a better, clear picture of like what's been done so far so that everyone kind of comes in with a baseline understanding. So Amy, go ahead.
Okay, and was this the guy, remind me, was he the one that created a calculator already?
Yes.
Okay,
So, yeah.
so what I'm wondering is, as I'm reading through on page 3 of the document that you sent, and in the North Carolina section, and this is where I keep coming back to too, right, is the pay parity with the public school teachers. And so if his scale, if his calculator is aligned and somehow to the pay parity with the public school teachers, like I'm envisioning, can you create an app or whatever, where you could type in for your area, say Lawrence, Kansas, USD 497, entry level kindergarten teacher, education qualifications for that education level, first year. This is what they make. And then it pre-populates from there and backwards, and then tells you this is what an entry level, early childhood teacher should make, etc. Could we develop something like that? Could that kind of a calculator be made so that depending on where you live in Kansas, it makes sense for your community, because you're not going to pay the same thing as people in Johnson County are making, as people in Western Kansas are making. It's not going to work, and you can't make it across the board for the whole state. It's going to have to be literally, like it says, pay parity with your area school district. So can it be something where you can kind of give it a general idea? This is either you put in a zip code, this is the cost of living in my area based on my zip code. This is the starting salary for our kindergarten teachers in this district, something where you put in a few data points, and then it creates a salary schedule for you. And then every business, every center, every whatever has an opportunity to say, okay, this is what the salary schedule should look like. I may or may not be able to do this. Maybe I can do this at 60% of this or 70% of this, but this is my goal. And, and this is something I can take to whatever I can use for advocacy purposes, or I can take to local businesses and say, look, I'm only able to do 60% of this. My goal is to get to 100%. That I want to be able to reach pay parity. This is what it looks like on paper. But if we had a calculator that would do that and produce that document, produce that salary scale, I think that could be a useful tool. So that would be my question, Dan.
So the short answer is yes. The factor that you're talking about, Amy, the variable that you're talking about, I think is what is the target wage for childcare providers? And I think I have heard two ways of looking at this: cost of quality care for childcare as a thing on its own, and pay parity with K-12. So those could be one and the same. Those could be different because, as we know, childcare providers don't, tend to work the full 12 months. And how are we factoring pay parity with K-12? So I think one of the questions would be, as we talk to Simon, is are those the same figures? Are those the same wage goals and targets that we would want to hit? Because we can plug in any target and have the tool kind of calculate what that is. But I think that's probably a question. I think that's a question for discussion.
Well, and part of it, I think, is probably known to a certain extent. I mean, as a provider myself, I know I put about 80% into wages. My income goes into wages, and that's pretty high. Not everybody does that, but that's because I try to put a lot of teachers in the classroom, as many as I can. I try to always be above ratio if I can, and keep the number of kids lower if I can. But that speaks to quality, right? So. But all that said, if the wages based on pay parity were higher for those people, then I'm increasing quality. I'm not saying this very well, but I think if we had a number such as saying that we know that 75% of your your expenses are based on your salaries, then that other 25% of whatever the cost of quality is whatever, your
Yeah.
cost of your curriculum, the cost of your
Yeah.
supplies, whatever. But it's heavily invested in your labor.
Sure.
So I think that cost of parity is just when you're weighing those factors, it's going to land heavily on that pay parity side. But I hear what you're saying. And I think that, like you're saying, overall, the cost of quality, it's just that I'm saying it's weighted very heavily on the labor side.
Absolutely.
But I hear
yeah.
you. I do.
Yeah. Kelly, Davy Dopp.
I just had a follow-up question. So when we're talking about pay parity, are we equating that like across the credentials as well? So like if we're talking about pay parity with early child or with K-12 educators, we're looking at that in terms of early childhood educators that are similarly credentialed. I know that was part of, I think, the language in Build Back Better, and I know that that's a whole other thing. I don't mean to go down that rabbit hole, but that was just part of, I think, sort of the federal level conversation around pay parity is looking at like similarly credentialed. And if that's where we're going with pay parity, then how do we look at compensation strategies to increase for other early childhood professionals that might not be at the same level of credential as a K-12 educator?
I can make another comment.
Yeah, no need to raise your hand. This small group, you're good. So go ahead, chime in. Thank you for your manners, though. I appreciate it.
Sorry. So a group of us got together. It's been a couple of years now, but we got together and we ran a little exercise. I guess it was our local KSAEYC chapter, and we ran a little exercise on pay parity. And so we got numbers from our local school district, and it said, if you were a first year teacher coming in with a bachelor's degree, you made $41,000. If you came in with a master's degree, you made I think it was like 5,000 or 6,000 more. And same again, if you came in with a PhD. And so we just started working it backwards. And we said, if you came in at 41, but instead came in with an associate's, we subtracted 5,000 or 6,000. And if you came in with a CDA, we subtracted another 5,000 or 6,000. And we just worked backwards so that we're kind of addressing, like you're saying, each of those credentials that we utilize in early childhood, but giving them sort of those incremental steps so that you had that salary range, that scale, that kind of aligned, at least in steps as they were going forward in the public school system. So we had a range that started at no less than a living wage in the state of Kansas, which I think was 24,000 or something, whatever that number was. That was our bottom number. And then we went up from there, and we stair-stepped with those same increments that the school district did, going further than the bachelor's. Does that make sense?
And we're doing the same thing actually, as we've been as part of our strategic plan, trying to figure out the same parity issue or whatnot. And parity for us, we're also including, so we're looking at education. So we're not saying that the lead teacher with an associate degree should actually get the same pay as the licensed bachelor's licensed teacher, although they don't feel that there should be a difference, but we want to pay for education or whatnot. We get that. And so you want to see that difference. The other thing that we included in that parity, however, is also, we don't have the ability to contribute to capers. And so how does that, wrap into all of that? They work 12 months a year for us. Well, besides Christmas and our shutdown week or whatever. So how do we compensate for the additional 2 months over the summer to make sure that they're actually getting paid for that? So it actually ended up taking that base pay of like 41,000, that they would get starting out using the number that you gave or whatever, and actually kicking that up quite a lot, when we added in the cost of the district insurance versus ours, the working the summer versus not having to work over the summer, again, the capers, for retirement or whatnot. And so we factored all of that in to try to create parity. And then we sat there with our mouths open and shocked, and then tried to figure out how to make that happen, right? And then worked our way down from there. So we figured out what that number needed to be, and then what does it need to be all the way down to the associate degree level. So, but again, I'm very anxious to hear what Simon, how his model works or whatever. But anyhow, but that's what we did to do in terms of parity.
I'm really interested to see how this is going to align with the career pathway, because that needs to be a part of it, right? When we're developing this career pathway, and that's going to be our, here's compensation for these different levels of what education you have. Amy, your comment about how different cost of living is across the state is like, yeah, right on. You get paid way less in Southeast Kansas than you do if you live in Johnson County. So I'm interested how we're going to use that career pathway to kind of set our pay parity. And if we're going to, Sarah, if we're going to need to like make adjustments for different regions of the state.
I wonder if it's more like it's a code, like we say, it's a level A or a level B, Z, double A, whatever. And then in your area, that code translates into a dollar amount in your specific city. We may have a code that's statewide, but that code translates into something else locally.
Sarah, I have a
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
question. You've dived or dove into the state information more than I have. I'm familiar with Simon's work in general.
Mm-hmm.
But are there other states that are using that more local district level or even regional level information about cost of care, or are they just using statewide models?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I think about locality as to think about other industries that have, wage differential with cross state kind of industries. I don't know how, and just to be honest, the career pathway to date is really focused on getting the levels right so that there is pathways for like higher education, pathways for that really honor experience and professional learning. And how wages layer over the top of that that's like next step kind of conversation. And so the pathway right now doesn't really take into account any kind of regional differences that might be in place.
Sarah, this is Melissa Martin.
Yeah.
And our work is, we're sort of tangential to early childhood and partner with it, but we're working in the public school pre-K through 12th grade space, and we do work across not only Kansas but 3 other states, so that we've got multiple districts and multiple municipalities, and we actually ended up moving to just a flat baseline, more or less, for staff that did not take into account geographical differences in cost of living, after having used that model for a while. And I apologize, my voice keeps going in and out. It's the allergies. But one of the reasons that we ended up leaving that and moving to a standard base rate is that what we found was, while technically the cost of living in the Kansas City area was higher than Southeast Kansas, it was also harder to hire in Southeast Kansas. There were other considerations that really made it to where, when we put everything together, it was just ultimately more effective to have that same base. And then we do differentials based on credentials, tenure, that kind of thing. But I did want to just offer that voice of experience, having tried both models and finding a common rate more effective. So.
That's really insightful, Melissa, particularly around deserts, where you don't have enough staff to, I mean, there's deserts everywhere, right? We have slot shortages everywhere, but to think about that as that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that.
This is Reva. I just don't want to lose track of the cost of quality care. I think parity is a piece of this conversation, but it's also assuming that the school district has all the answers. And then I think about, even just the logistics of Shawnee County having 6 school districts, and they do pay differently. And so how do you, so I hate to just use that and not also include this conversation and exploration of what true quality early childhood services actually cost to deliver.
I appreciate that, because when we're looking at, how do you define quality? Is it just the teacher at their level of education and their pay? But is it also the family supports that are in there, or the social emotional supports that are in there, or the type of curriculum that you're using, or the type of whatever, and the length of time that the children are in care, and the, and that kind of stuff. And so, hopefully all of that is part of the dialogue, and not just pay. And so I appreciate that.
So to that point, who is looking into this cost of care question?
Kelly, do you want me to answer that first before, or do you have a comment that would help with that?
I did not actually. I have another side question comment. So maybe do that and then I'll jump in.
Okay. I'm trying to see, Lisa or Jen, if you want to chime in here, but I feel like we do the market study, right? The market rate study, which is just showing what does the market say for the cost, which we know is not the cost of quality. I don't know if DCF is, I know it's been conversations about cost of quality and like trying to figure that part out. I know other states are struggling with this. I feel like this is something that we should have on our radar and be a question we could ask Simon, like how are other states factoring this in? To your point, Amy, and I appreciated the comment about salary, like labor is the biggest part, but it is not the only part, right? Quality includes quality curriculum. It includes quality spaces and environments and stuff like that. And so I don't have a great answer for like who in Kansas is looking at that, but like that is absolutely like the national conversation. And when he talks, when I talk to Simon about, what is he really aiming for when he designs his calculators, it is really about market rate is not sufficient. That is just telling us what we already know. We need to dive deeper into cost of quality, and we need a way to help other stakeholders who are not in this industry all the time, our economic development partners, our state leads, people who are controlling purse strings. They have to understand really what we talk about when we're talking about the cost of childcare is cost of quality childcare. So I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure, on that.
But even in any of these other states that you've got this information from, that all of them seem to be referring to pay parity and things like that. So are any other states working on even defining what is quality, how, or defining what is this cost of quality? What numbers are we working with? Are anybody in the country specifically working on those numbers?
Can I jump in on this one? And that's why I asked you about New Mexico, because I know that you had that connection with New Mexico, and so they and help maybe like Washington D.C. or something are truly using a cost of care when they're discussing their subsidy rate. So they have those areas have, there we go. Sarah threw in some information about that. So that was what I was wondering if you actually had more information about that, but if that is something that you have discussed with them, I think New Mexico and your connections there would be a really great place to start to see how they're actually using it. I think they have some of the best. They seem to be farther along than the rest of us.
And Rhode Island too, though, right? Didn't I hear Rhode Island?
Is that it? I don't.
I think they're pretty far ahead of most places too, but yes, I will reach out to them. I haven't talked to them in a while.
New Mexico is the one that Simon and their new organization that I can't remember the name of right now, really lift as a model.
Okay, this might be a good place to jump in. Sorry.
Yep.
I also wanted to try to flag or maybe have further discussion here to tying it back to Jen's comment about subsidy. And if we're looking at compensation strategies, and as we're thinking strategically, systemically about all the other ways to move towards quality too, like, is there a way to tie some of this to participation in the subsidy program? I don't think we're enrolled where we want to be in terms of providers participating. We're certainly not reaching all the families that we could be. So as we're thinking about things like compensation strategies, and as we get, further down whatever path we're heading with, quality rating and the workforce registry and the career pathway, like layering on some of those other things that we want to see can be a really strategic move when we have opportunities for like compensation, incentives, things like that. So if there's a way to connect all of this to subsidy participation, I'd love to see that. Yeah. I'll pause there. Let others chime in.
And Kelly, I appreciate that. We know that those who participate in subsidy, most centers that receive subsidy limit the number of children that they can accept with subsidy because of the rate of reimbursement. But in terms of reaching the number of people, I think that's an even larger discussion because, 10 years ago, we had significantly more families receiving childcare subsidy than we have now. And policies changed in our state in terms of eligibility and that kind of stuff in an effort to try to make people more self-sufficient or whatever they were trying to do. And so in doing that, our numbers decreased significantly in terms of people who are actually qualifying for subsidy. And so that opens a whole other conversation in terms of what needs to happen in order to increase families, that are eligible for subsidy so that we can fill those slots, which is different than the worker recruitment, or the, getting the providers to be involved. But I don't know that that's what this group tackles or does or whatever, if that's something we want to do, but I'm just saying that the numbers looked very different 10 years ago in terms of the number of people who qualified for subsidy than they do now.
Yeah, I think there's two sides of it. There's the family side and then there's the provider side. And it's like we have to tackle both of them simultaneously in order to make this work. But if we're trying to look at cost of quality, let's look at that for reimbursement rates and then make sure providers know about that and then layer on the other incentives and tie quality to that as well. If you want to access some of these wage supplements or scholarships, I think there's things that we can do to say you need to be participating in or accepting, subsidy families in order to access some of these additional resources. So
I just threw that up there. That's off of that article you just put in the chat. So it shows all of the breakout, but the benefits, in my mind, I know they're breaking it out separately, but in my mind, that's kind of a part of the wages. I mean, it's all compensation, benefits and wages and benefits are all compensation. So you're left with classroom materials and foods, office and administration, and that I suppose you still have to pay, or unless they're not considering that salaries, maybe they're just considering that the cost of internet and phone and copy machines or whatever. I don't know what occupancy is supposed to be.
That's your rent and
that's it for
rent and overhead and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, that
it's
small, yeah. But okay. So, whatever that percentage is of the whole, that's the extra cost of quality above the wage piece that we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think this is where, models fall short, right? Is that we can all think of examples of where that doesn't jive with what it is that we know to be the case in the center we're familiar with, or a family child care provider we're familiar with. And I think that is the impetus driving like a local model, a Kansas specific model, something that does factor in, that pulls in zip codes, that pulls in like other data. So we can start having a conversation about real figures at a local level and not be looking at something that is, an aggregate across other states. But it's a little bit of where do you start, because we're so far away from the real cost of quality reflected in the wages that we pay. It's moving towards that. Amy, go ahead. Amy Meek, sorry.
Oh, thanks. This is Amy Meek. We talk about the cost maybe of like an infant slot, maybe here in Shawnee County, or a toddler slot. It's really not the cost, it's how much we charge. So we use those figures a lot, and I think that's misleading because when I go to the grocery store, there's a cost for the milk, and I'm paying. Anyone that wants to buy the milk, the grocery store is going to pay that. Now, how they're able to pay that is a variety of ways, but I think we just hurt ourselves over time of not putting the cost, the true cost, out there. So we've been charging much less than, and it is a business model that doesn't work anywhere else I can't think of another industry where this works. And so I think we're not a public, this isn't a infrastructure like public schools or whatever. So we're caught in this, I think, just a misunderstanding. And if on July 1st, everyone said, July 1st, we're all across the board, any childcare provider is going to charge the true cost. Like, I mean, we'd have a real problem, but whose problem is it? I mean, I had children in childcare, so I get that, but I can't think of another industry where it's on the backs of workers to subsidize it. And it's frustrating. And I've had these conversations. I don't know why we don't put out there the cost, the chart, the true. It's been kind of unknown, and that's I don't understand that, I guess. I mean, I do understand it. We could go back to the history of childcare and all of that, and that's part of it too.
Amy, I put in the chat the costofchildcare.org, and that's some of Simon Workman's original work, and you can go to Kansas. I mean, the first thing it asks you is what state. It doesn't ask you what county, what zip code, but it does ask what state. I think that's a really easy way to talk to people about the cost of care. It's also a great tool for business owners, for childcare business owners, to really look at what should they be charging, and having those hard conversations with themselves, because we know that it's difficult for them to be in a place where they believe that they are worth all of that, and they then have to turn on and have the conversation with their parents that they would like to increase their wages. And I like to share that on social media when I can, just because it's interactive and easy for people to use.
Yeah, that's worthwhile.
In some ways it's a little fun, in some ways it's super depressing.
We are slated to take the 10-minute break in this time. So if everyone, does this feel like a good place to pause and take a quick break, and then we can come back and finish the conversation? Does that feel good to everybody? Okay, so we'll take a break and we'll come back at 10:08. 10:08 or 10:09, whatever you feel like. Thanks, guys. I see we're getting most folks back. Hope you had a nice break stepping away from the computer. So we have about 20 minutes left before we have to go back to the full group. So I have a couple like thematic notes from the first part of our conversation. We talked about the different things to incorporate into a compensation scale, whether that is differentials for credentials or I was also thinking about hours. If you're working evening shifts or overnight shifts versus day shifts, how to fold this into the career pathway, how to think about parity with K-12, how benefits fit in. Another theme I wrote down is the connection to the subsidy system. And I don't know, I feel like I'd heard that there was a survey going out to families about accessing subsidy. Some reasons behind that, Jen or Lisa or Kim. I know you guys wear lots of different hats, but I don't know like if you know about if there's anything from that or you can speak to that, because that would be, I think, good information to help us understand why do only 12% of families access subsidy.
Yes. And that's the point of the study. It's not there yet.
Okay.
Because things don't move very quickly around here.
Okay. Well, that's helpful to know. No need to apologize. That's helpful, I think, for this group to know that that's happening, and that can be good information to inform that. But noting that the subsidy is on both the provider side and the family side. I wrote down the question of who is defining quality. And I know we have the QRIS system at the program level. And I think a question for any conversation related to the wages is how does the QRIS fold into the wage system, if at all, or is that an added thing on top? And then the question of who is defining cost of quality, which I think is the big question, not who necessarily, but what goes into that cost of quality. So those are kind of the four things I wrote down.
Find out it, like if there could be sorry, itchy trigger finger. If I could find out, like maybe it's a survey we put out or something to say, in the last year, how much did you spend on curriculum? In the last year, how much did you spend on consumables like crayons, markers, pencils? How much did you spend on, replacing equipment, cots, tablets, chairs, tables, whatever, and try to get a cost, an average cost of, whether it's consumables or materials and toys and expenses that are anything other than a compensation and benefits, wages and compensation stuff. If then we can maybe start to get a feel for what that cost is in Kansas. But we need to define what those pieces of quality are that aren't related to compensation packages.
Does any of that go into the market rate for those of you who've participated in that, the market rate study? Is it just wages and cost that?
It really is just like, what do you charge? Then there was this year we did a supplemental, and Lisa could probably speak to this more than I can because it was completed by the time I got here. But then there's a narrow cost analysis, which is not exactly the same as a cost of care study, but it is at least moving a little bit closer. And Amy, when I've, because I've been following Simon's work for a while, the way he tends to do it is really not what did they spend, but what should they be spending? What should you be spending if you had the money to spend it? Because I'm pretty sure you would replace those things more often if you had more money to replace those things.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so his numbers are a little shocking when you see them, but it's more, they talk a lot about price of care versus cost of care, the price being what you are living it right now,
right. But still at some point there has to be sort of a par level, who's deciding that I should replace my trikes on the playground every 5 years because they're too rusty and old and the wheels don't go around right anymore. Who decides that it should be every 3 years or 5 years or 7 years that I should drop $300 a trike and replace all 10 trikes on the playground? Who makes those decisions and qualifies that as saying this is high quality if you change them every 5 years, but it's lesser quality if you only change them out every 7 years. and maybe I'm asking too much detail, but these are the things I deal with as a provider. I have to decide when I'm going to spend that money. I have to decide, I have to prioritize. If I'm going to offer high quality, do I spend the money on, X, Y, or Z? And does that offer more quality to my kids? Do I put the money into certain classroom materials inside the building, or do I spend it on stuff on the playground? These are the decisions I have to make as a provider.
Yeah, the one thing that I get, when the state, Jen says, okay, well, so how much do you charge? Which is a different question than how much does it actually cost?
Yeah.
We're fortunate. That's why we have our block grants and our KPP grants and our whatever, to be able to subsidize the cost of care. Otherwise, it would be on the backs of our families and our employees, that at that point, and they wouldn't be able to afford that. And so, factoring in how much it actually costs to provide care tells a very different story than how much we charge our families.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I'm listening and I'm hearing what Jen's saying about his making up his mind about what these things should cost, not going back and asking people what they're spending. He's saying what they should be spending is, but I'm saying, how is he deciding that this is what they should be spending? Where's his information coming from?
I can't wait to ask him next month.
There. Okay.
Oh, that's exciting.
So that's my question. How is he deciding? He's not a provider. He's not boots on the ground. So how is he deciding that, that's quality, that, this many crayons a month is quality or whatever.
And then, you're right. That is a lot of detail. And it also depends on what kind of materials you're buying in the first place, because I've seen some of those trikes that will last 20 years and some that'll last 2. So.
Yeah.
So I'm noting a couple just questions to kind of elevate for Simon. Any other, this is really the conversation for around wages, and anything else that we want to talk about in this group, anything else we want to really dive deeper into or have a conversation about.
Does he look at startup costs separately?
I will note that question.
I was also going to add, Sarah, when you were talking about differentials for credentials or off-peak hours, you might maybe put in there a differential or a variable, whatever you want to call it, for maybe full or part-time status. When I get somebody that comes in and only works a few hours after school in a late PM status, they don't really have the same responsibility as somebody that might work 8 to 3 or whatever and have a full-time position.
So that comment brought up a question that I had on the document that you sent out, Sarah.
Sure. Mhm.
I think on the, oh, I can't even read my notes. The top of the second page, and I know these are just ideas, but so I'm just saying this is something that caught my attention. It said a bonus of up to $1,000 for owners, administrators, directors, and lead staff. What about those assistant teachers? Because to me, they make the least of anyone and probably need that supplement more than anyone. So are they being considered as you think about these payments?
So that was just a translation of the retention bonus stuff. I wouldn't hold the launch or the implementation of that program to what is on this document, Reva. So I would point that question at, Kelly or others from who are leading implementation of those bonuses, because that's just a translation of the concept.
I just wanted to advocate for them because,
Sure.
For one thing, those are people that potentially could move into those lead teaching positions. But if we don't keep them in the field,
for sure.
And then, again, just as my opinion that may mean nothing, is I was just hoping those bonus payments could be more.
It's changed a little bit since we originally brought conversations here to this work group. So we're getting very close to kickoff of this, and all roles are in there, Reba, down to drivers and cooks, and everybody's being considered. It's now, it looks like the split's just going to be between full-time and part-time, with all roles except for summer camps, because they only work such a short time of the year. And it is looking like it's going to be a little bit higher payment. I think the last numbers we were throwing around was $1,500 for full-time and $750 for part-time, I think. Which we would love to give more, but there's only so much money to divide. And when you start adding in all those additional roles, that's a lot more affiliates, but it's exciting. We're getting close.
And that would be anybody that works in any division of childcare or whatnot, and they would submit something through somebody and then get it paid directly. It won't go to a center, it will go to the person.
Yeah, it's looking like there's going to be, the application is going to be on the individual basis, but we're going to send out a notification to not only all individuals that may qualify, but also to centers to say, hey, looks like you have staff that qualify. Please let them know. Here's where they go to apply. And also, while you're at it, go ahead and update your affiliate information in Claris so that we make sure we have everything updated. So if there's any cross-checking on the back end, if there's somebody that's not in Claris, but can, uploads all the documentation that shows that they qualify, they're going to get paid. We would just use that as a, hey, go in and update your information on Claris so we make sure we match. But that's not going to be you're not in Claris, you don't qualify. As long as they got their pay stub and everything that they can upload, they're going to qualify.
And is it based off income?
It is not based off income.
It's pretty amazing. That's very cool.
Since we're looking at the document, I had one comment, Sarah, and just probably something that I'd like you to check with Sarah Mitchell about. And it's regarding those startup stipends. And it says in there for recruitment, which I think would be really fantastic if we could do that. But I think, and Kelly, Mark, you might be able to help me with this. What I believe is happening is we're not advertising those right now to the general public. So it's not really a recruitment. It's more of a discussion after they begin the orientation process. And those of you who know more about that.
Yeah, they have to have a temporary permit to qualify for the startup stipend. We didn't want to advertise it to the general public because we didn't want folks coming in saying, hey, I'm interested in starting a childcare and then never following through. with orientation or getting a temporary permit. So the surveyors are connecting them to the Child Care Health Consultant Network, and Kelly D can talk about this too. But when they get their temporary permit and their first survey, then they're getting connected so they can get that stipend. And if they missed out, if they got their temporary permit and then they already moved to their full license, we're giving them like a 6-month window of, hey, I already got my full license, but I've had it for less than 6 months. They're going to qualify for the stipend as well.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I would, just to add more context to the document, like I wouldn't take it as the answer for all of these things. I would take it as a group of people who are like trying to further the compensation conversation as just a quick internal tracking planning document. So this is not something I would use as, if you want to know more about the things that are listed on here, I would absolutely go to the source of those programs rather than use this document. This is just kind of an internal guide or snapshot of, okay, let's make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. Let's make sure we're acknowledging what's been done. Let's make sure we build off of things that have been done and not try and like pretend that we're starting this conversation around wages and compensation from scratch or from, ground zero. So if you have any questions about stuff that you're seeing, I didn't write it. I can certainly point you to folks that helped inform it, or encourage you to reach out to the state agencies who are leading the different efforts to implement the supports that are happening. So. Any other questions, conversations, discussions? It's a complex topic. I think one thing that would be helpful as wages comes up in community groups, and we know there's a lot of coalitions at a local level. We know the Child Care Aware of Kansas team did some communities in action with other resource and referral agencies across the state. So lots of local organizations are really, lots of local communities from across industries are really trying to address wages. And what is the role of this work group? How do we want to, do we want to do a scan of what's happening locally? I mean, we can do some searching and seeing what's happening across the country, but I think there's some really interesting conversations happening at a local level here in Kansas. What are those? How do we learn from those? How do we elevate those? What can we try? And I think, what's the role of this working group? What do you guys want to get accomplished related to wages and compensation, if that's the topic, or broadly, this is the Child Care Recruitment and Retention Working Group. So continue to kind of put that question back, and what kinds of threads do we want to pull? What kind of nudges do we want to make to the system more broadly, to the cabinet specifically as the panel?
But this is Amy Gotchamer. I'd be interested in seeing if anybody else is. I'll just throw it out here, in seeing if we could maybe move forward with some kind of a salary scale generator, for lack of a better word, that would help people create salary scales, in their region in Kansas, based on pay parity and cost of living and, everything else that we talked about, all the other variables, so that they can start looking at the actual, fair wages and compensation in their area. Whether or not they're able to actually accomplish that is something else, but at least they'll know what those numbers should be.
Thanks, Amy. Kelly?
Sarah, I really like, thank you for flagging sort of the local and community conversations that are happening. I think that's a big piece of the conversation that we're seeing kind of across lots of different whether it's at the city level or at a county level or even regionally, talking about compensation and sort of the workforce strategy behind all that. I think you're right. There's probably things we can learn from the local communities, but then as this conversation progresses, and if we decide to take a concrete step forward with a recommendation, or there's going to be a system level approach here, making sure that we have the feedback loop with the local communities so that they can decide, like, is this something I still want to try to tackle locally, or do I want to redirect my limited time, energy, resources to other things? So if this is going to be addressed systemically, I think it's really important that communities know and can plan accordingly so that we're not duplicating or, I think this is a really tricky one to try to tackle locally, honestly, because it's a bigger systemic issue, and it's really hard to bring together kind of the local resources necessary to tackle wages at that scale. So however we can kind of have that bi-directional feedback loop with the community conversations, and I'm happy to help and partner on that, like whatever we can do to support that, but just kind of wanted to add the other side of that too.
Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate that. That's a great point. I've held you to 10:30, so I am going to release you back into the large panel group. I will just note a few things when we have the share out, but I would highly encourage others to weigh in on the kinds of things we talked about today. So thank you guys. I'll see you back in the big group.